In a coastal mansion off Anchorage, Alaska, a teenage maid mopped marble floors while being mocked by women who didn't know. She was the daughter of the man who owned the entire estate. She wore secondhand sneakers. She smelled like bleach. She kept her head down. And while the head maid, now dressed in pearls and privilege, hurled insults at her, no one noticed the photo hanging behind them in the hallway. Faded, framed, forgotten. A missing persons flyer from 20 years. A gawker, same eyes, same smile. But no one looked closely. They were too busy calling her poor girl. The Alaskan sky turned violent that night. Thick clouds swallowed the stars above the Gulf's black water. A private yacht, meant for celebration, was now trapped in a brutal storm. On board were 4 souls: a billionaire, his elegant wife, their young daughter, and a maid whose loyalty had quietly soured. The husband gripped the wheel, trying to outrun the waves. The mother clung to the rail with one hand and held her daughter with the other. Chaos surrounded them. Cold wind whipped across. The deck like knives, and the sea surged with rage. The maid was close, too close, but she did nothing. Then the woman slipped. Her grip faltered. She screamed as her fingers clawed for the railing. The maid stepped forward. She reached down and caught her wrist. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then slowly, deliberately, the maid let go. The woman and child vanished into the sea. No one else saw it happen. The husband was unconscious below deck. The storm would be blamed. The maid returned inside, soaked but calm, and said only that tragedy had struck. The sea had taken them, but the sea hadn't finished its story. 30 miles north, a lonely fisherman named Nolan found 2 bodies on the rocky shore. A woman and a little girl. Cold, barely alive. He carried them back to his cabin without a word. He lit the stove and wrapped them in wool blankets. He waited. When they woke, they remembered nothing. The woman stared at the walls like they held secrets. She didn't know her name. She didn't even know the child beside her. The girl stayed close, clinging to the woman like a memory that refused to fade. The only thing left was a ring, a pearl set in platinum. Nolan made a choice that night. He told the woman her name was Moo, told her the girl was her daughter, that they lived here together, that he was her husband. She believed him. What else could she do? The girl, still small and silent, accepted this new truth. She began calling Nolan Dad. The lie grew roots in the snow-covered soil of that quiet cabin. Nolan never reported the survivors. He never questioned where they'd come from. He just kept them, for company, for control, maybe even for love. Far away, the real husband mourned. Every year he returned to the sea, placing flowers where the waves had taken his family. He never remarried. He never stopped searching. The maid stood by his side. She wore pearls now, attended business dinners, smiled at sympathy she didn't deserve. People whispered she was loyal, faithful, kind. They didn't know she had created the tragedy she comforted. And so the years passed. But no lie stays buried forever, not even in the sea. The fisherman's cabin stood between towering pines and gray, restless tides. The woman, now called Moo, moved through it slowly, like a ghost learning to walk. She still couldn't remember anything, only that the man said he was her husband and the child was her daughter. He was calm, kind even. He spoke gently. He never raised his voice. And Moo, with no past to cling to, accepted this as her truth. The girl, Fasai, grew up in that cabin. She played with sea glass, fed gulls from the porch, and learned how to clean fish. She didn't ask many questions. By the time she was old enough to wonder who they really were, the lies had already taken root. Nolan raised her as his own, taught her how to be tough, how to work hard, how to expect little. And for the most part, she was content, but Mu always seemed unsettled. She baked pies with unfamiliar recipes she somehow remembered. She sang lullabies she didn't know she knew. Sometimes she would stare out at the sea for hours, as if waiting for something to rise from the water and explain her life to her. Nolan would try to distract her, tell stories, cook, even offer her the pearl ring to wear. But the past lived, quietly in her bones, no matter how much he tried to silence it. Years passed. Nolan aged quickly. Mu remained beautiful but quiet. And Fasai, growing into a graceful teenager, began to sense that their life wasn't what it seemed. The ring became a secret she couldn't stop thinking about. She once tried to ask her mother where it came from, but Mu only said, "It's older than I remember." Meanwhile, in a large house south in Anchorage, the maid who caused it all now lived like royalty. The billionaire had never remarried. His grief made him cold. The woman he once trusted, the maid, became his shadow. She managed his affairs. She handled his medication. People assumed they were a couple, but the truth was, he didn't love her. He just didn't know what else to do with his life. Each year he made the same trip, back to the water where he lost everything. He stared at the sea, prayed for answers, and tossed fresh lilies into the surf. The maid always came with him, always acted supportive, always held his hand and stayed quiet. She never feared discovery. 20 years had passed. There were no police calls, no missing persons reports that ever led anywhere. And with every passing season, she believed more firmly that the truth had drowned with that woman and her child. But the truth hadn't drowned. It had simply drifted, and it was growing up in a fisherman's shack, baking, cleaning, dreaming, and getting ready to enter the world. Fasai turned 17 the year the bills finally caught up to them. The small income from Nolan's fishing had dried up. His health was failing. Their boat was falling apart. Mu's pies sold well at the Saturday market, but not enough to cover mounting repairs or heating oil. Fasai knew it was her turn to step up. So she walked into downtown Juneau and applied for a cleaning job at a luxury resort. She didn't know who owned it, didn't know her face was in a framed missing person flyer buried deep in the hotel's storage archives, didn't know her bloodline, built the resort's granite walkways and funded the rooftop spa. She just wanted to help her family survive. The job was grueling. Early mornings, long nights, bleach, buckets, and aching fingers. Fasai cleaned bathrooms, polished banisters, and folded sheets with practiced precision. The head maid, the same woman who had caused her mother's fall, was in charge of the staff. Of course, neither of them recognized each other. Time had changed their faces, masked their memories, but it didn't change the power imbalance. The head maid barked orders and made snide comments about Fasai's old shoes, her patched uniform, and her silence. Other staff laughed. Fasai never defended herself. She bowed her head and scrubbed harder. She had always been taught that kindness and endurance were strength, even when the world mistook them for weakness. Then, one day, she crossed paths with the resort's owner. He was older now, frail and stooped, walking with a cane through the garden courtyard. He dropped that cane near the rose bushes. Fasai, passing by with her cleaning cart, picked it up and handed it to him. Her voice was soft, her gesture effortless. But it hit him like a wave. Something about her, her eyes, the tilt of her head, felt eerily familiar. He didn't ask her name that day, just watched her disappear down the path. That night, he sat by the window of his penthouse suite, holding an old photograph. It showed a woman with dark hair and a baby girl on her lap. Both had vanished 2 decades earlier. He hadn't looked at the photo in years, but now he saw a face in it that reminded him of someone he'd seen by the roses. Meanwhile, the head maid had also noticed the exchange. She watched from a hallway window as the old man smiled at the girl in rags. It made her stomach turn. It made her nervous, because if he looked too closely at Fasai, if he asked too many questions, everything she had stolen could start to crumble, and she would not let that happen. A week into her job at the resort, Fasai brought her mother's pastries to the break room. Mu had packed them with care, tied with string, and labeled in neat handwriting. Fasai offered them to staff during a slow afternoon. Most declined. Some mocked the homemade box. But one tray ended up at the executive floor. The billionaire tasted one, and he froze. His mind flashed backward, to a yacht, to sea breeze and laughter, to soft hands placing a warm pastry on a porcelain plate. He whispered something to himself and looked around, confused. The flavor was too specific, too precise. It tasted like something that hadn't existed since the day his world vanished. He asked who had brought them. No one knew her name, just a cleaning girl. But the memory gnawed at him. That same night, he sat by the fireplace in his private suite, staring at the pearl ring he had once designed. A pink pearl wrapped in diamonds, custom made for the only woman he ever loved. That ring had disappeared with her, and so had the only photo of it. But now rumors swirled through the concierge team. A girl, young, poor, had recently sold a pearl ring at a downtown pawn shop. The shopkeeper had been bragging about it. The billionaire made a call. He asked to see the footage. Meanwhile, Fasai and her younger brother Lom had sold that very ring weeks earlier. They hadn't known its value. They only knew the family was in trouble again. Medical bills, boat repairs, overdue taxes. Mu had offered the ring without a word. Her hands had trembled as she let it go. Fasai had sold it for far too little. The buyer hadn't even blinked. The moment she left, he'd locked it in the display case and doubled the price. When Mu asked where it went, she simply said, "It's gone." But now it was back. Not in their hands, but in someone else's. The head maid overheard a conversation outside the office. A staff member mentioned the billionaire was looking for a girl who sold a rare pearl ring. Her blood went cold. She excused herself, left the hallway, found a quiet corner, panic rising. That ring had been on Mu's finger the day she vanished, and if it had reappeared now, after all these years, someone had survived. Someone she thought she had buried. She made a plan, and she moved quickly. The head maid didn't sleep that night. She sat in her corner suite, once a servant's quarters, now redecorated with silk curtains and antique glass, and made calls. The pearl ring had resurfaced. That meant Mu was alive, or worse, the girl was. If either truth came out, her place in the house, her access to the fortune, would vanish overnight. She visited the pawn shop before sunrise. With cash in hand and a tight-lipped expression, she bought back the ring and erased the receipt. Then, she walked out, clutching it like it was evidence from a crime she thought she had gotten away with. The billionaire, however, had already seen the pawn shop footage. He couldn't get a clear look at the girl's face, but her hands, the way she held the ring, the shape of her fingers, looked hauntingly familiar. He ordered an internal check. He wanted to know who on staff had sold a pearl ring, who baked the pastries, who handed him the cane in the garden. The trail pointed to one girl, the cleaning girl from the guest wings, Fasai. He whispered the name to himself again and again. That same morning, Mu stood on the porch with her pie boxes when something flickered in her mind, a fragment of memory, uninvited and sharp. Rain, waves, a scream, a woman's face twisted in jealousy. It came and went like a breath, but her stomach turned. She dropped the pie box and clutched her head. Fasai ran to her side. For the first time in years, Mu asked, a question with fear in her voice. "Have I always been here?" Lom, standing nearby, said yes. Fasai hesitated. She didn't know why, but something in her mother's eyes made her doubt everything. Later that day, Fasai was in the basement supply room, gathering towels when the door slammed shut behind her. The light flicked off. Then came the hiss of leaking chemicals. Someone had broken a bottle, ammonia or bleach. She gasped for air, kicked the door. No one answered. After minutes of choking silence, the door finally opened. Pat, the head maid's son, stood there. He said nothing, just watched her scramble out, coughing and dizzy. When she asked what happened, he shrugged. "Old pipes," he muttered, but his eyes darted. His voice didn't match his face. She didn't believe him, and she wasn't supposed to. Somewhere above them, the billionaire stared out at the falling snow. He'd given up hope for 20 years. But now, something was stirring. The past wasn't done with him yet. Moo stood in her small kitchen that night, icing another tray of pastries, but her hands shook. Her memory, once empty, now flickered with sudden flashes. The sound of crashing waves, the flash of lightning, a child crying. She stared at the pearl ring's imprint on her finger, even though the ring itself was gone. Something about that bare skin haunted her. Across town, the billionaire paced his private library. He had a team searching every department at the resort. They had traced the pearl ring to a girl named Fasai. The pastry, the cane, the voice, everything pointed to her. He asked for a background check, but there was barely anything on file. No birth certificate, no hospital records, just a high school diploma and a local mailing address. He called his sister, the only one left from the family, who remembered everything. She looked at the photo. She stared at the old necklace. She gasped. That girl. She looks just like Dodge. The name hit him like ice. His wife. Moo's real name. Dodge. And suddenly, he wasn't tired anymore. He asked to meet the girl. But before he could act, the head maid made her move. She sneaked into the office late at night and typed a resignation letter with Fasai's name on it. She logged it in the system. She printed it. Then, with a few swipes of a pen, she forged the billionaire's signature on a staff termination form. She slipped it into the folder pile on the front desk. The next morning, Fasai was called in and let go without warning. No reason, no explanation, just cold eyes and sealed envelopes. She didn't cry. She just picked up her things and walked out. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. This wasn't a mistake. This was a warning. At home, Moo found the letter and stared at it. The handwriting, the signature, the way the paper smelled like something from another world. Then the memory came back. Not all of it, but enough. She remembered standing on a yacht, remembered shouting, remembered a hand letting go. Her voice cracked. "Loom," she said. "Your father, Nolan, he lied." Lom froze. He wasn't ready to hear it. And yet, he'd always known. He just didn't want to lose the woman who raised him. That night, a package arrived at the billionaire's door. No name, just a thumb drive. He plugged it in and watched. Security footage from a week ago. Fasai. In the break room, leaving pastries, picking up a fallen tray. Smiling. His hands shook. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. He whispered to himself, just loud enough to hear, "She's mine." The next morning, the billionaire arrived unannounced at the small bakery stand in downtown Juneau. Moo was behind the counter, placing apple turnovers onto a wooden tray. She looked up and froze when she saw him. Her face shifted. Her hands trembled. Something deep in her bones recognized the man before her. But her mind hesitated. He said nothing at first. Just stared. He took out an old photograph. A woman in a sundress. A toddler beside her. The image was yellowed at the corners, but the faces were clear. Moo's hand went to her mouth. Her knees nearly buckled. She whispered something, but it didn't matter. He already knew. "You're Dodge," he finally said, his voice cracking. "You're my wife." She collapsed into a chair. And beside her, Fasai stood silent, listening, feeling, realizing that her whole life had been a script written by someone else. Word spread fast. The hotel staff whispered about the billionaire's sudden disappearance. The maid was panicking. She stormed into the office, tore apart files, tried to access the resignation forms again, but the system had been locked. Tick. The billionaire's sister had taken over administrative control. That night, the maid met Pat behind the maintenance shed. "You need to leave town," she told him. "You've seen too much." Pat shook his head. "I'm not running. Not again." For years, he had ignored the rumors, ignored the bruises, ignored the moments when his mother got too quiet and too dangerous. But now it was different. The truth had a name, and that name was Fasai. At the hospital, Moo and the billionaire sat together for the first time in 20 years. He took her hands. She looked at him like she was still waking up. They spoke in soft tones, reconnecting, rebuilding, remembering. Then Fasai entered the room. He turned. Their eyes met. There were no tests, no need for proof. She had his wife's eyes. She had his mother's smile. She had his silence, heavy, measured, thoughtful. He stood up slowly, approached her, and wrapped her in his arms. Not gently, but like someone who had waited decades to breathe again. And she, shocked, trembling, let him. She didn't cry, but her chest rose and fell like a heart breaking and healing at the same time. She didn't know what to call him. He didn't need a word. The truth spread quickly, like wildfire through snow-covered trees. Staff whispered. Papers were pulled. Legal names were reprinted. And the maid, once the master of every hallway, was suddenly nowhere to be found. Tick opened the financial records and found inconsistencies. Forged signatures, withdrawals, power of attorney slips written in a dead woman's name. They called the police. They handed over everything. Pat made the final call. He gave them his mother's location. When the police arrived, she tried to run. But guilt moves slower than fear. And once they cornered her in the garden shed, she dropped to her knees beside a crate of old uniforms. Her last words before being taken away? She was never supposed to come back. But she had. Fasai had come, back stronger. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The resort closed for a full week. Staff were rehired under Fasai's name. The cleaning crews, once mocked, now wore pressed uniforms with stitched badges bearing the name Fasai Group. The billionaire signed full ownership of the hotel to his daughter. He didn't hesitate, didn't blink. He simply handed her the pen and smiled. He had waited 2 decades to give her something real. Moo began remembering more. Not just names, but moments. Laughing in sunlit kitchens, dancing on the yacht, holding her baby on her chest and whispering, "Your name means sky." And every time she looked at Fasai, she said it again. "My sky. You came back to me." Nolan left town quietly. No one followed him. He left a note behind for Moo. It didn't apologize, not really, but it admitted the lie. And that was enough. She folded it, burned it, and turned the ashes into compost for her garden. She said it helped the strawberries grow. The resort reopened that summer. Guests returned. Tourists booked months in advance. But now the staff smiled for real. The cleaners had new shoes. The cooks played music in the kitchen. And in the center of it all, Fasai walked the halls with the kind of quiet pride only truth can give. No shouting, no revenge, just grace. One afternoon, she stopped by the beach. The tide was low. She looked out, toward the sea that once tried to drown her, and she smiled because it hadn't. It had just sent her home a different way. Truth may sleep beneath the waves, but it never drowns. It always finds the shore. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Leave your thoughts below. The best comment gets pinned and featured in our next post. Let's hear your voice.